So, Aaron, obviously this conflict's a bit different to, fighting in Afghanistan or in Iraq or Syria or whatever it may be. So, on the ground then, what does this conflict between the cartels and the government actually look like? What incidents characterize it? What sort of tactics characterize this conflict?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I picked Mexico, even though it's most people wouldn't consider it a conflict. It's not a war zone, but that depends who you ask, because the previous president, Felipe Calderon, he declared war on the cartels, and then you could call it a war. But this current president in Mexico, he declared peace, so now they have peace. But these are just words to describe the exact same conflict, essentially. So what you have in Mexico is a kind of a process of paramilitarization in which different groups seek to wipe territories clean of their rivals. And in certain areas, there is an absence of violence, but this is often due to the fact that there's a monopoly on drug trafficking or an agreement between rival groups in a certain territory, such as the state of Durango. So every state in Mexico is quite different, depending on which cartels are involved. If you look at a state, for example, Michoacan, you don't see just cartel versus cartel or cartel versus state. It's much more complex than that. So, like I said, you have a lot of splinterings and alliances, and then you have these self-defense groups, which are called autodefensas, which are basically vigilante paramilitaries. For example, in Michoacan, you have one of the larger cartels, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which are fighting a band of different criminal groups that are partly, autodefensas. They are partly cartels themselves. Depends on how you define it. So you have the United Cartels who are fighting the CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. But these united cartels are, a bunch of different armed groups that constantly evolve and sometimes fight between each other. The state is an interesting concept in Mexico, because the state isn't absent. Like, it's not, although Michoacan, for example, is a very faraway region where security forces have difficulty getting to. The Mexican state is actually quite powerful, and the state and the military are very much participants in this negotiation for political power. So, for example, the Sinaloa Cartel is believed to have penetrated the federal government in the previous administration of Felipe Calderon, where his head of security was allegedly on the payroll of the Sinaloa Cartel. But other cartels may infiltrate state governments, and then these, different governments are controlled by different cartels, which sometimes causes a military to face off with state police in some cases. So the state is very much involved in this whole process.
So you mentioned self-defense groups that are operating against these cartels. Are there any connections between these groups and political parties, for example?
Well, the cartels are definitely heavily involved in politics, even though that would define them as terrorist organizations in a way. They are, let's not go there, because definition of that is hard. But they do definitely fund political parties, and in Mexico, a drug boss can also be the mayor. In terms of self-defense groups, it's interesting, and it's hard to know what's real and what's not. Like I mentioned this group before, the United Cartels, which are a grouping of smaller cartels, which you can also define as self-defense groups. The line between a self-defense group and a cartel is very slim, because you start off being farmers taking up arms, and then you get funded maybe by another cartel who is also against your opponent, and eventually you start trafficking drugs, and what's a self-defense group at this point? And some cartels who are actually really deeply involved in criminal activity, they'll rebrand themselves as self-defense forces just to appear more legitimate.
Thanks for listening to that clip. If you want to hear the whole episode, please head to wherever you get your podcast from.